Today's reading is from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. This week's reading, Intuition is simple, the intellect is complex. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. Mark, Chapter 10, we read a passage that Yogananda often quoted. And they brought young children to him, that he should touch them, and his disciples rebuked those that brought them. But when Jesus saw it, he was much displeased, and said unto them, Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for such is the kingdom of God. Verily I say unto you, whoever shall not receive the kingdom of God as a little child, he shall not enter therein. It has often been noted that a critical attitude tends to paralyze creativity. Good critics, for example, seldom produce works of creative genius, though their creations may be intellectually clever. The intellect separates. It analyzes, then puts things together again piece by piece. Intellect lacks intuition's flow, which descends smoothly like a river from the superconsciousness. Paramahansa Yogananda described intuition as the soul's power of knowing God. To receive the kingdom of God, Jesus was saying, one must do so with the openness and trust of a little child. Intellectuals may object to this statement, saying, but there must also be discrimination. You wouldn't want a person to be so open-minded that his brains fall out. The truth is, however, that the intellect can be fooled, even when it does its best to discriminate wisely. Only intuition is capable of penetrating to the heart of a matter and knowing truth from falsehood. It was the clear understanding of a child, not the elaborately persuaded intellects of his elders, that enabled the child in Hans Christian Andersen's story to cry out in surprise, "Why isn't the emperor wearing any clothes?" Therefore, it was that Sri Krishna said in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, "To you who are free from the carping spirit, I shall now reveal wisdom sublime. Grasping it with your mind and perceiving it by intuitive realization, you shall escape the evils of delusion." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning to everyone. We had a lovely harvest celebration of the equinox last evening by Zach and Haley from the farm, along with the staff of the farm. So those of us who got to be here are doubly enjoying the fruits of their labors. When is it, October 1st? They have another farm supper, I think? Yeah. Anyway, if you haven't visited Ananda Farms on Camino Island, you're in for a treat, especially before the weather really turns, and they have a farm supper coming up. Today our topic is intuition, and at the same time, last Monday was the 68th anniversary of our founders, Swami Kriyananda, his meeting of Paramahansa Yogananda, whose teachings we represent and share here. And so for us, it's a kind of like a spiritual birthday for Ananda, because without that event, we couldn't even be here today. So we'll talk a little bit about Swami Kriyananda here and there as we progress. You know, it's gratifying to see, I think by all of us, many people around the world, gratifying to see the spread of the practice of yoga and meditation happening exponentially on the planet today. And yet, whereas Hatha yoga, the physical yoga approaches the state of yoga, a state of, could be described in many ways. We'll just call it oneness, connection, peace, contentment, and so forth. The Hatha yoga approaches that through the awareness, the possession, self-possessing, if you will, our physical form as a temple of spirit. And that's wonderful and helpful. We can't give back to spirit that which we ourselves don't yet possess. It'd be like giving a gift that you stole and handing it to somebody. And Raja Yoga, meaning meditation then, more or less approaches the same experience from the other direction, from the mind, from consciousness, by focusing at the spiritual eye. But so much of the practice of meditation, in some of its mindfulness forms, of Hatha Yoga, in some of its more intense physical fitness type orientation, is not yet really conscious of this thing we call super consciousness, intuition, which is the sort of linkage between the state of Intuition is like the cell phone number. Intuition is the stream of consciousness flowing from superconsciousness into the conscious mind in order to inspire and to generate action and so forth. And so this teaching, which is very much the centerpiece of one of Swami Kriyananda's landmark books, it's the core text for our meditation teacher training. It's called Awaken to Superconsciousness. Really nails the point in a way that you don't see that clearly. In fact, often, as I say, in much of what's taught in yoga and meditation, it's simply ignored. I mean, it's perfectly fine to obtain stress relief from meditation, but all it is, you're still stuck with yourself. It doesn't necessarily take you anywhere, at least not as they teach it. But in fact, hidden beneath, the big issue today, and you think it's an issue here probably, but it's also an issue in India, which is yoga spiritual? Sort of a joke. I mean, it really is a joke, because obviously it is. Is it sectarian? Now that's a different question. Just as obviously it need not be. But that is the issue. Morley sent me a link from, I think it was Bombay, anyway, somewhere in India, where a court ruled that teaching the sun salutation was okay because it was, I don't know what it said, fitness or something, notwithstanding its roots, its spiritual, its ultimate, very high spiritual meaning and so forth, that nonetheless, and this is India no less, okay? So this debate's probably going to go on for centuries, I'm sure, but nonetheless, that's my point. So much of even yoga and meditation, which has its roots in the highest possible spiritual traditions of oneness with God, etc., however you want to put it, is, as it were, being used for all sorts of things. Now, I don't object to that because, what else could you be doing? Going to a bar or, I don't know, just lifting dumbbells? Okay, you see my point. Because as we possess ourselves, as we become calmer, the spirit and the channel towards intuition awakens naturally. Now, it'll awaken much more quickly and dynamically if we're aware of it, and we intend to do that. But many people walk through those doors, coming to our form of what is sometimes called spiritual yoga. Again, it's so redundant, it's almost insulting, but that's what they call it, from where they're coming from. But nonetheless, we are opened up to the nature of our true self as we become calm. How many here have watched the movie, The Man Who Knew Infinity? That's all. What a bunch of schmucks. You need to see this movie. It's on Amazon, it's on Netflix, it played at a couple of movie houses. It's a wonderful movie. It's a movie about Srinivasa Ramanujan, who became, in the 20th century, one of the most famous mathematicians. He was born somewhere around Chennai, down in southern India, more or less illiterate. I mean, he went to school, but did not really have the formal training. Eventually, he got the attention of some of the most renowned mathematicians, first in India, and then later he got invited to Cambridge in the 1910, 1914, somewhere in that area during the British Raj, and in which there was still a great deal of prejudice towards anyone of color. But in any case, because of his astounding genius, he was invited to come, and he did. Didn't live very long. It's sort of a sad story in some respects. But what's remarkable about the story, it's the story of intuition. Because these formulas, he would pray and to Divine Mother in the form that he held dear, and he said, and these formulas, these theorems would appear in his mind, just like with Beethoven, an entire symphony would appear, and then he'd have to struggle. Imagine that, write by hand, all these notes of a symphony with an orchestra. What a laborious, what tapasya, as we say here, what a laborious task. Well, in any case, Ramanujan would have these incredibly complex. In fact, the movie downplays the math because nobody's going to understand. I tried reading up on it, and I was just hopelessly lost. But anyway, he was remarkable enough that he caught the attention of some of the foremost mathematicians in the West. And yet, these things came to him in prayer and meditation, spontaneously, and in the movie, it makes it seem like he was unwilling to go through the difficulty, like Beethoven writing down the notes, of proving his theorems. He was so certain. This is the nature of intuition. It came to him so fully formed, complex solutions to things that most of us couldn't possibly even come to grips with, that he saw no need to. Now, there can be a little bit of arrogance in that. That's one of the issues with people who are intuitive. Our teacher, Swami Kriyananda, who was extremely intuitive, warned us in his training that he said, don't inflict your inspirations. Oh, I had and believe me, I have to hear this all the time, no matter what we say here. People don't get it. But don't inflict your inspirations on your loved ones or your co-workers or whatever it is. Okay, it came to you in meditation. That doesn't mean it's, I come back from seclusion and share my ideas with Padma, and she, quoting one of our friends, says, some of your ideas are better than others. And so Ramanujan's theorems had to be tested, but it took years in the development of computers to prove some of them. So, but nonetheless, this is mathematics, this is science, where you don't normally think of spirituality or higher consciousness at all. Another one who, in my lifetime, was quite famous, I think her name is Shakuntala Devi. She too was from South India, and she was the famous woman who beat computers, the early computers, admittedly. She took, as one example, she took two 13-digit numbers. That would be like, a million has has about 7 digits, right, as a whole number, maybe double that, and multiplied those in 28 seconds, got the answer. She took a number that was 201 digits long and computed the 23rd root of that number in 50 seconds. They had to hire a UNIVAC 101 supercomputer of the times in order to test her calculation. My father told me that his father, therefore my grandfather, who was a statistician for Railway Express in New York City back before they had calculators and things like that. Now, again, I don't know how they proved this, but he'd watch trains were big in his day, and he'd watch the trains go by as a statistician. He'd add up the numbers on the boxcars, which are, 7 to 10 digits, and tell you what the total equaled when the last car went by. I don't have anything like that, but I was going to college right on the cusp of the development of small little calculators, and I would play with an abacus for fun, but I could go down in my accounting classes and come up with the sum of a row of, let's say, 4-digit numbers, 20 of them just by... That's intuition. The president of Harvard once wrote an article I've quoted a number of times in which she denounced intuition. You see, our culture doesn't understand, doesn't really admit of the practical nature of a higher level of consciousness. You know, Padma just started her spiritual counseling certification course, the first one we've ever done, yesterday. And I'll be coming to it next week, talking a little bit about levels of consciousness, which is very profoundly shown in this book I mentioned, Awaken to Superconsciousness. And, you know, the subconscious mind is a little bit like like a servant. It's a little bit like an engine in a car. You know, the car doesn't care where you go or what's in the trunk or whatever. It just motors you along. Well, inside this marvelous human body is all sorts of things going on that you don't have a clue and you have no control of. The marvel of the subconscious mind is that all of these functions, spleens do whatever the heck spleens do, and livers do liver-like things, but we don't have any control of these things. And the subconscious being a receptacle of habit so that we can, drive the car and talk at the same time, it's basically is there to keep us breathing and moving and digesting and eliminating and all these different things, but it's there to protect, defend the ego, which is of the conscious mind. So today, when we are reading, when we talk about the intellect, that's actually not wholly accurate, because in our culture, with the word intellect, we think of intellectuals. But actually, what it's really talking about is the ego, the conscious mind. And the conscious mind is really good at, dividing up the whole world, and I like you, I don't like you, and being judgmental and so forth. The critical mind is basically, generally, very self-involved and driven by ego protection or affirmation. And as a result, its world is fairly petty. Okay? And when you think of somebody in science who can, just even being science, forget spirituality for a moment, who can essentially channel such knowledge and art and science and so forth, there is a much greater reality. There's a lovely thing I found on Facebook. This young man, this black fellow, with his proof of God, just quotes all this scientific stuff, and nonstop, like bullet, like I could barely understand him. Talks so fast, but it's just delightfully charming, showing the findings of science, leading edge science, attempting to connect the dots, is clearly at the cusp of a higher consciousness. In the movie Interstellar, when they went into the black hole to the point of singularity, the point that existed the moment before the Big Bang, they'll never get there. They're basically talking about God. Oneness, the point of singularity, out of which everything comes. We're moving there, in other words. But I want to shift gears because my friend here today, let's see, where are you? You're here somewhere, gave me another book on Padre Pio, because I want to move into intuition in the realms of spirituality. Now, Padre Pio clearly had as his mission to serve the Catholic community, particularly in Italy. I happened to grow up in a fishing village known as Monterey, which is no longer that, but in my day, in the 50s anyway, it was mostly a fishing village of Sicilians. And the Sicilians had a great devotion to Padre Pio. So I grew up with Padre Pio on the mind, as it were. And this one book is a recounting of just hundreds, probably thousands of miracles, literally, that Padre Pio performed. Simple things like even a card of his picture, a little holy card or whatever we called those when we were kids, would exude a perfume. Wherever he walked, people would often many incidents of bilocation, even to, believe it or not, New Jersey. He appeared in New Jersey one night. Somebody was dying. And this young Capuchin monk in brown robe showed at the front door in the middle of the snowstorm and cold with his bare little sandals on that he wore from southern Italy. Walked in the door, did a blessing for the man, walked out, and nobody knew who he was or where he came from, but there he was. So, these things, like Teresa Neumann in Bavaria, who Yogananda visited, she was a little bit more on the metaphysical side, so his connection was more with her. But Padre Pio is a deeply inspiring, not for his miracles, those are, what they are, but deeply inspiring because he represents so perfectly the way of the cross, the way from which we as a culture have come. It's not what inspires us today. Joy, today's affirmation, as we say in the Festival of Light here in a few minutes. And whereas pain and suffering were the coin of man's redemption in former times, for us now the payment, Yogananda has proclaimed in his life and our lives, has been exchanged for self-acceptance, calmness, and joy. Because our consciousness is steadily expanding, and we realize that the only pain in the spiritual path is the pain of the ego, having to deal with its suffering and trials and tribulations, which come to everybody. You don't need to be in the spiritual path by any means. As Buddha said, illness, old age, and death come to everyone. And he set out to solve the riddle. And the riddle is called ego. The riddle is called the petty, small self. When we can expand our heart's love and compassion to go beyond the ego affirmation and ego definitions and self-defense, we experience a world dimly described by science, as I said, but dynamically described by saints of East and West as a state of joy, as a state that we recognize, that requires no definition. It requires only the willingness to be still, as it says in the Old Testament, and know. And yet, Yogananda, as charming and charismatic and joyful as he was by his own nature and loving, when it came to his close disciples, he trained them with discipline. He knew the way of the cross also had to be, because the death of the ego, and to the ego it seems like death, but in infinity, in God, nothing is possibly lost. We just think we have to give this up or that up, and our self-preoccupations, but it's simply not true. The energy that is released by the captive, you might say, kundalini, the self-affirmation of my separateness on a deep and existential level, is reborn and expanded into the gifts of the spirit, the different centers, psychic centers within the astral body: love, peace, joy, inspiration, and wisdom, and so forth. And so the two must walk together. The willingness, in fact, one of the great teachings of the Bhagavad Gita is self-sacrifice. Jesus did that on the cross in his way. But self-sacrifice is the renunciation of the ego principle in favor of a greater good and a greater reality. It's not unlike investing and for the long run, putting aside your time to go to college, money, loans to go to college for a greater benefit, for a young couple in love who sacrifice for their children. We know that instinctively. Nothing good is accomplished by just, having a good time. We never know when the good times will end, but we know they will end if we even have a moment of self-reflection. And so this is instead of being self-sacrifice, we see it as an investment of our energy, an investment in a good diet and wholesome food, an investment in a wholesome relationship that's filled with respect, an investment in a career or activity that fulfills towards our own ideals. We don't have to see it as what we give up, we see it now, we can see it now with the intelligence of this awakening age as that which we want and that which we are. But the two are the same. There isn't really any difference. I'm not a recovering Catholic, but those recovering Christians and Catholics who come to the practice of yoga have to go through their process of rejection, perhaps. But in the end, truth is one and the same, as we say every week in our reading. It's just that the emphasis, Yogananda called it a new dispensation, but there's nothing new under the sun. What he meant was we are awakening to the sun. We are awakening to the light. That this way of life, this lifestyle that's inclusive, cooperative, focused on that which is right and true for ourselves, for our bodies, for our relationships, all these things, as I say, is the path of salvation, the path of redemption of our spirit in God. There is no other way. There is no, it is all one essentially, but the emphasis has shifted because we are ready for it. Live by intuition. When I was young, I'm still young, but when the body was young, I did not consider myself very intuitive. In fact, I was so left-brained that it was part of my challenges early on in Ananda's history, dealing with Kriyananda and the people there, because I was sort of doing finances, and there's nothing more left-brained than finances, you'd think. But you see, it isn't true. I'd show a financial statement to Swami Kriyananda, who couldn't possibly know what he was looking at from a left-brain standpoint. He'd look at it, and he'd ask me one question, and it was the one question, or at least one of the questions, I couldn't answer. He showed me up every time, because he could see through. And, over time, it's not natural to me now, but I can look at numbers just in my way, like Ramanujan. There's this delightful story in the movie, but it's real life. They got in a cab in London, and the cab number was 1729. And the other mathematician, the Western guy from Cambridge, remarked to Ramanuja, "Oh, what a boring number," because they're mathematicians, so they look at numbers. And then Ramanujan just smiled, and he gave some complex explanation why this number 1729 was really awesome, because it was this and that of, I don't know what it was, a cube or a root or something. Anyway, and one of the other professors there said, Ramanujan has a personal relationship with every integer there is. If you love something enough, or someone, or what you do, as George Washington Carver, the great botanist, or Luther Burbank discovered, if you love something enough, it will reveal its secrets. Is that not true in human relationships? And if therefore, and then what I was going to say is now I can look at numbers and they speak to me. This is what Padma likes to say too. I can see through a balance sheet or whatever and see what's happening. Those numbers, it's like tea leaves or your palm or your iris or your foot. Anything, everything is a hologram. And it reveals something about yourself to those who are in tune with the vibration and the innate intelligence of everything. The colors you wear, everything about you reveals something to those who are in tune with that way, and of course with you to some extent. This is the teaching of Dwapara Yuga, the New Age, is that there exists a realm of gnosis, of knowing, of intuition, which we can access, but we must drop the baggage of the ego and lift our hands to receive. In meditation, when we go through the techniques, the whole purpose of the techniques is to bring us to a point of stillness, where with our upraised hands on our thighs, or whatever those are called, there is a downpouring of knowledge. This is the path of intuition. And it's going to take some time for it to spread. But each one of us can open up to that flow of intuition. Thank you.
I'd like to read to you Yogananda's words from Whispers from Eternity. Demand for the rising of the aurora of intuition. Infinite Spirit, thy presence is hidden equally behind the warm rays of the sun and the cool light of the moon. Those lights, though welcome and wonderful, reveal only Mother Nature's splendor in matter. They do not reveal thee. To me, they are therefore darkness. Thy all-revealing, majestic, and supreme light shines not on, but from within, the center of everything, therefore creating no shadows. Shadows in this world reduce light itself to non-light. In theory, I have known this. Now, Lord, take all darkness away from me. Wherever I sit with eyes shut, enclosed in my own darkness, cause to blaze upon me in glory the aurora of intuition, that suffused in its light, I may gaze raptly on thee with worshiping eyes. Om Shanti. Amen. I'd like to give you an opportunity